isn't it? All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Intentional Wellbeing Podcast. I'm excited. Today, I welcome to the podcast. You may know her as the Fat Athlete here on Instagram, but this is Marci, and I want to say, in the Caribbean, we say Braithwaite, but did I get it right? No.
Braithwaite.
Braithwaite. Everywhere else in the world's Braithwaite. So it's kind of funny. I just mentioned to Marci, I have a cousin named Marci Braithwaite, although in the Caribbean we say Braithwaite. But yes, welcome to the podcast. Let me tell you a little bit about Marci, brackets Mia. She is an RRCA and a USATP certified running coach for people in larger bodies and slower runners, which is me. Slower runners. Her focus is on changing minds and mindsets about bodies and running and making running accessible for all kinds of people. She's also a size-inclusive fitness specialist, and she works to improve fitness spaces for all bodies. She's been featured in Runner's World, yay! Run, Try, Bike magazine, Run for Your Life magazine, and on numerous podcasts, including this one. Welcome to the Intentional Wellbeing Podcast. We are so happy you're here.
Thank you so much, Diane. I have to say it again. I am totally fangirling, so thank you for having me.
Of course, right back at you. I ran across your Instagram page probably about 6 months ago, and I was so excited to see it because the group of folks that I've run with throughout my running career have been a myriad of sizes, but I'm usually the biggest size. And what I noticed about when I'm out here running, people would say to me outside of my running experience, you run so much, how come you're not thinner? And I'm like, because this is just how my body is packaged together by the divine and by my ancestry and by all the people who have contributed DNA. This is how it's poured into its container. So that's how it looks, regardless if I run, do push-ups or whatever. Mm-hmm. This is what I look like. And I'm grateful for my grandmother's thighs. So you can keep your comments to yourself. I'm sure you've heard stuff because I know you posted about it on Instagram. People saying all kinds of super ridiculous things to you.
Yeah. How do you okay, so one of the things, and without getting into the whole fat liberation aspect, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that people's bodies are the way they are for literally hundreds of reasons. Okay. It's not just the amount of food you eat and the amount of exercise you are or are not getting, right? So when someone comes to you and says, when you're running so much, how are you still fat? What they're not even considering is all of the reasons that your body is the way it is. Genetics is a huge one, but there's also social determinants of health. And that is one of the major determinants of how your body presents itself. But there's also the fact that it doesn't freaking matter. We're out here, we're moving, we're being healthy, and we're loving it. Get off our backs.
Yeah, like you can't win, right? It's just like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And the amount of people who like to congratulate us when we're out doing our thing and being in our group is also irritating. So I know none of my listeners here would do this, but if you've ever seen a person in a larger body, a plus size person, a fat person, however you identify, out here getting joy in our movements, we're not looking for validation from you. Like, you can just keep moving on. Keep it moving. We're out here celebrating the bodies that we're in. And every time I teach a yoga class, I ask people to put their hands over their heart and give thanks to their bodies for showing up for them today in whatever capacity your body was able to show up for you today. And to bask in the idea that with pretty little effort, you manage to come into a class and move around the class pretty easily. So we are operating from an able-bodied mindset. Yes. And I think you should acknowledge that, right? There's nothing, and to be grateful for your body and however it shows up. And that's the message at the end of every class. Instead of hands in front of heart, it's hands over heart. Because I said, this is the only vehicle you have to experience this miraculous thing called life. So why can't we just celebrate it in the ways we want to celebrate it? Why does there always have to be a running commentary around what it should look like, what it should do, what's fit, what's not fit, who gets to work out, who doesn't get to work out, who has a voice? Like, how come you can't just celebrate everybody's individual achievements for what they are, or how that makes people feel good? I'm just like, I'm on a bit of a soapbox today.
Well, it's a soapbox that it deserves to be stood upon, And honestly, there's so much, honestly, that the voices and the narrative that's going on, no one is worse at that than our own selves, right?
Exactly.
It is, and that's one of the things, the number one thing that I do in any of the courses that I teach, they're more mindset courses than they are running courses. Like the amount that I teach about how to run is much smaller in terms of how much I teach people to convince themselves that this running is, one, something that they can do, and two, something that doesn't have to look the way that everybody else looks or thinks it should look, right? So there's a lot of this up here that you really have to start with to be able to do anything physical, especially if you're in a larger body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me, Marci, how did you become interested in running? Like, what made you decide? I'm always curious about that, because when I first started running, I've been on a break for a couple of years because I had some knee things going on. Mm-hmm. The first 7 minutes of every run, I'm like, why do I do this? How come I'm doing this? When is this going to end, right? When your body's finding that equilibrium, and then you cross this imaginary line, you're like, okay. But I can't, it didn't matter how long I ran. That first 7 minutes was always hard. Tell me, how did you become a runner?
So the first mile is a lie. That's generally a recognized thing in the running world. But for me, so I was never a runner when I was younger. I did a lot of things. I was very active as a child. I did play sports. I was never really good at team sports. I always felt like I didn't quite fit in a lot of different places. And so I didn't ever really try out for anything because I'm a former gifted student who constantly had a fear of failure and just didn't want to even try if I didn't know that I was going to be 100%. So what I did do was more individual things. I took ballet for 8 years. I did horseback riding for several years. Every single course or class or sport that the YMCA offered, I took classes in, swimming, gymnastics, all that stuff. I was always very active. But I didn't actually run, and I've always been in a larger body. When I was, it was almost a year after I'd had my youngest, my daughter, and I developed some major lower back pain. And what happened was I went in to get the X-rays read, and the doctor. It was a warm day, and we had walked up like 3 flights of steps to get to the room, and I had a little bit of sweat on my forehead, right? So I sit down in the room, the guy shoves the x-rays into the viewing thing, looks at me, asks me if I was diaphoretic, which took me a second to realize he just meant I was sweating. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, then it worked, and I just walked up 3 flights of stairs. And then he's looking at the x-ray, and he goes, you have a bulging disc, and I forget what specific words he used, but you have a bulging disc. Your back is 20 years ahead of where it should be. You need to lose over 100 pounds or it's not going to get any better. You may not be walking. And then he said, and this is the part that pissed me off, you can't do it on your own. You're going to have to get weight loss surgery.
Wow. Good Lord.
And at that point, I was like, completely defeated, because I've always been an active person, even though I've always been in a larger body, and I was coming out of, postpartum depression, and all of these things were going on with me. And the doctor just knocked me back a few paces. Right.
Yeah.
So my husband and I, long story long, my husband and I went to a weight loss.
Long story long for sure.
Yeah. So my husband and I went to a weight loss surgery seminar, right? That thing that they send you to before you sign up for the program. We're sitting there and we're listening to all of the things that are involved in the weight loss surgery. And it still to this day boggles my mind that some people think that this is the easy way out, right? Because I'm sitting there and going, you have to, for the rest of your life, eat literally nothing. It is a doctor prescribed surgical eating disorder. is what weight loss surgery is. And as I'm sitting there, and, you know, my husband has an aversion to anything that is surgical, that's absolutely, you know, unless it's absolutely necessary in the first stage of your life, which makes sense. Then for me, I was like, I just really don't want to do that. Like, I feel like there's a healthier way I can do this. So, of course, at that point, I decided to go on a completely restrictive diet, restrict my calories to about 1,500 a day, and start running, right? So, 8 months later, I'm 80 pounds lighter, and a success story, right? 13 years later, I am no longer the success story. I am actually probably a little bit over where I was originally, although I haven't weighed myself in years. And I've learned a lot over the last 13 years. But what happened was I started running because that doctor told me that I couldn't lose the weight on my own, and I needed to do something to change something, right? The funny thing is, even though I've gained the weight back, I have never, since I had one cortisone shot in my lower back to fix the pain, I have never had problems with my back again. Even though I am heavier now than I was back then, I have never once had problems with my back. And that is with training for a marathon, running 40 miles a week, putting all of this, you know, quote unquote pressure on my lower back. I have never had problems with my back again. And I, to this day, after learning how to run, figuring out over the subsequent 13 years how not to get injured, because when you first start running, you just go out there and you expect, I'm supposed to run for 3 miles, right? That's how everybody does it. And you don't know anything about it. You don't know what your form is supposed to look like. You don't know how to avoid plantar fasciitis, which almost everybody gets. And you don't know how to avoid runner's knee, which a lot of people get. Shin splints, all that stuff. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know when you first start running. And there isn't a lot out there in terms of, especially for those of us in larger bodies, communities where we can learn this stuff. So I just kind of came into it through, when we moved to Colorado for about 5 years, I joined a group called Moms Run This Town. And it was a local running group, and it was run by my friend Jill, who is just the most amazing human being. And that changed my life. Joining that group and then moving back home to Washington State, and starting, started with another friend of mine, my running group up here, which I'm still a member of, but I'm not in charge of it anymore. I stepped down because of this. But finding that support system, finding the people who, when I went to my first group run with Jill, she tossed me a tank top in a size 2X. And I'm like, first of all, this is a running tank top and it's in my size, right? That was huge. And second, she wanted me there. Even as a runner in a larger body, she wanted me there and was thoughtful enough to provide something to let me know that, right? And that was immediately, I was done. I was like, this is my community. This is where I belong. This is what I need to do. And Jill was what inspired me to create the community that I'm creating right now with my Facebook group and on Instagram and on TikTok and all these things that I do. I was inspired by my Moms Run This Town group and Jill, the leader there, to do what I do. So
that's, you know what, there's something amazing about that. Are you familiar with Big Fit Girl, Louise Green?
Yes. In fact, I was, I'm certified through her with the.
That's what I figured with yes, because we talked a lot about that course that she taught and for ACE. And don't worry, everybody, I will link all that down below. And when I interviewed her for this podcast last year, she was also talking about running. And that was one of the first times I saw a bigger bodied person running. Yeah. And I asked her about, what got you started? And she said a similar feeling, that sense of belonging, because she signed up like at a store called the Running Room to a Learn to Run clinic, and all these really tiny folks in the space, and she was like, this doesn't look like me, nobody here looks like me. And then there was a bigger woman sitting down, and when the group was starting to when the group was coming together and the person was going to speak, she stood up, this plus size woman, and said, "I'm your running coach." And she said the top of her head blew off because, you're looking around and you're trying to figure out who the running coach is, and you're making assumptions either way, right? Yep. About what a running body looks like. And for this woman to stand up and say, "I'm your running coach," and she said the same thing you said, then I knew I belonged. And that is why it is so important to have representation in all of these spaces, because a lot of us cannot be what we do not see. We're not always the folks who want to step up and step out and be the first to do stuff. That's not always everybody, but we do need representation in those ways. And I'd love to hear, I watched your energy change and your voice change when you said, this person went out of their way to say, "I want you here," and then gave you a token of here it is. This is what I want you to be here. And to see a running clothes, any kind of active clothes in your size, is an invitation into the space, right?
Yep, 100%. And that's really what I hope to do with anything that I'm doing right now is to just invite people in, and there's so many gatekeepers, so many people and voices, and not to mention our own, that are telling us we don't belong in this space, yoga and running and fitness in general. So many voices that say you don't belong here unless you look a certain way. And I'm doing my best, doing my damnedest to convince people otherwise. Like, there are so many people who see people who look like me and think, "Oh, wow, I can actually do that." Now, that thought is also like, there's a little part of me that's like, okay, so we still have a lot to fight when it comes to that mindset. Like, just seeing someone who in a larger body doing running, for example, is so non-mainstream right now that we automatically think, "Oh, they're doing something special." We're really not. I'm just going out there and putting one foot in front of the other, right? And I'm not doing it any faster or more special than anybody else. But the thing is, you just don't see it that often. And so there does have to be people like me who are willing to get themselves on camera or on podcasts and be like, "You belong here. There are things that you can join. There are places you can be. There are mindsets that you can adopt that make it so that you feel like this can be something that you can do."
And I think that's important because in and of itself, I find running very challenging. And when I decided, I was exactly like you had said earlier, okay, I'm going to take up running today and just going to put on my shoes and I used to have like a clip-on odometer, right? A pedometer that you would put on. And I go, when I get to a certain amount of steps, that's going to be 5K or 3 miles. And you put on the shoes and you go full force.
Boom. Yep.
And then you fall flat on your face after about 4 minutes of like, this is hard. And I joined a Learn to Run clinic. But prior to that, I had been run walking, and somewhere in my brain, based on gatekeeping or things that I've seen in the media or what I've been told in my fitness classes, that you can't run walk, that it's like an all or nothing practice.
Right.
And for a long time, I was just like running and walking. And I used to run like light posts. Okay, I'm going to run the next 3, and then I'm going to walk the next 3. Or I'm going to run to the next fire hydrant, and then I'm going to walk to the next fire hydrant, and I'm going to run. And then I have a goal to just maybe run all the way around the block once. And then you end up getting caught up in pace. How fast am I? And I just was like, how about we just run to run?
Right.
Like, one foot in front of the other. Notice how you're feeling. What do I need to adjust? Do I need to slow down? Do I feel like I'm doing pretty good? What happens if I speed up a little bit? Oh, no. That's not for me. Maybe go back to slowing down. Oh, no. I'm sped up. This feels good. Why aren't we invited in that way? Why is it this idea with everything that it has to be all the way in or not at all?
Yeah. Well, and I think that a large portion of that is because when you do finally find running groups or communities that are for runners, the ones that tend to be creating these communities are the faster runners. They were good at it in high school or whatever. And so they've created this community. They've gotten a lot of, accolades for the running that they've done. And so they create these communities to continue that kind of community. And that's wonderful. But then they turn around and they say everybody is welcome, but then everybody comes to their runs and is left behind because they're slower runners. And,
Yes.
and runners also have to deal with, that the runners that are brave enough to actually toe the line at races, they have to deal with the time limits and things being broken down and no, water stations left if they're beyond a certain time. My marathon, I came in 12 or 18 minutes before the cutoff time, but I still had the ambulance running behind me the entire time, the last 5 miles of my marathon. And there's so many ways that our running community could expand our inclusion. One is to expand those running cutoff times, the race cutoff times. And I recognize all of the ways that can be difficult, but there are the World Marathon Majors do it. The World Marathon Majors leave cutoff times all night long. There are people cheering on the very last runners as they come through the finish line. There are ways that we can do it. There are ways that we can get volunteers to do shifts. There are ways that we can provide tables for certain amounts of time. There are ways that we can let runners who are slower start sooner than the rest of the runners, things like that. There's ways that we can make this community more inclusive for those people who want to be a part of it so that they don't keep getting the message that they don't belong, right? There are ways that running groups can have no drop runs or inclusion runs where they make sure that the slowest people have a buddy. And there's always somebody with them. And if that means that the fastest runners have to walk for that run, don't consider that a training run. Exactly. Consider that a community builder, right? And then run your training run the next day or later that day or whatever. There's just a lot of ways that the running community could improve and build the inclusion factor. And I just think that not enough people are talking about it. So there's just fewer and fewer communities that really do open up to the slower runners, the larger body runners. And those are not necessarily, the same thing, right? I mean, I am a slower runner in general, and I am in a larger body, but I've run a 9-minute mile. I've run an 8-minute mile. So I'm not necessarily just slow because I'm in a larger body. Right now it's because I'm recovering from an injury.
Right. But a runner's a runner's a runner. And one thing that really motivated me when I ran my first marathon is our running coaches saying to us, you know what they say about the last person who finishes the marathon? Do you know what they call them? A marathoner. And then I was like, just started crying. My very first marathon that I ran was the Detroit Free Press in 2002. And it's an international marathon. So you run across the Ambassador Bridge. You start in downtown Detroit, you're all corralled at your times, and then you run over the Ambassador Bridge, and then you run down Riverside Drive and run through the tunnel back to America, through Belle Isle, blah, 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 and you come back into Comerica Park. And it's a really fun run. It's a flat run. It's a qualifier for Boston. And I never thought about having that opportunity to have things open for longer for slower runners. Just because where we were running, we had the panic to have that specific time because you had to be over the bridge and through the tunnel because they shut down those things so you can't cross, right? So there's a limit. But the idea of people starting sooner is an idea. Creating community is a great idea. And I think one of the most, I don't want to say easiest things, but one of the most simple things to think about is what you said. Allowing people just more time, right? It can be done if we choose to do it, right? It can be done if we choose to do it. And that whole not choosing to do it really tells people that you're not interested in providing a space where we all can belong. Well, that's too hard. Is it really? Because we've put people in space. Yeah. This doesn't seem like that's a huge, thing to do. If we really want to include people, we can. There's a quote that I often use. It's often attributed to me, but I didn't say it. I heard it somewhere. It's diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a choice. And body diversity and diversity of runners, slow, fast, medium, big, rolling, all of those things have to count because we need to have representation across the board. This idea that certain people get to spin the narrative, and that certain people get accolades, and that certain people who are often genetically gifted in certain areas get to decide what happens for the rest of us, needs to change. And I'm so grateful that you are speaking up and putting yourself out there and allowing yourself to be videotaped and calling out people who say bullshit to you, because they're only trying to silence you, right? They're trying to keep things a certain way, and that can't be. There has to be space for all of us to participate.
Yeah. Well, and I've gotten lucky, if you want to call it that, up until now, because I rarely get those trolls on my accounts. But at this point, I have like 5,000 followers on Instagram, and I have about 8,000 followers on TikTok, which sounds like a lot of people, but it doesn't. It's not in the grand scheme of what goes viral and what's really, and so I don't have the amount of asshole eyes on me at this point. And I'm loving that in a way, because one, I don't have to worry about, I don't have to put the mental energy into ignoring or, blocking or commenting if absolutely necessary, on troll posts. But it also tells me that I kind of feel like I'm stuck in an echo chamber, right? Because I want the people who need to see me and hear my message. I want those people to see and hear me. But I also want the people who don't believe these things to hear the message as well. I want them to experience that cognitive dissonance and to really start to think, well, shit, if that person can actually do it, maybe other people are actually, maybe they can actually do it. Maybe I was wrong about thinking this. And I want them to start having that uncomfortable moment, right? I want them to actually go through that discomfort of maybe I was wrong.
Yeah. If they're willing to, like, there's that whole thing. People will do mental gymnastics to believe what they want to believe, even though they see the evidence right in front of them. Don't believe your eyes, believe what I'm telling you. Okay. Right. But I really love this idea that you want to have those eyes on you. You want, we really want to see that representation. I was in a athletic clothing store this month, maybe this month, it's already December. And I saw our hero up there, Myrna Valerio, in a big poster. And I left the store and I messaged her on Instagram and I said, this was a store that I had been calling out for decades around their non-inclusive sizing. Like that, you cannot be larger than a size, I think 12 at the time, or maybe even 10 in order to practice yoga in yoga clothing. And to see them come full circle and to see her on the wall as their global running ambassador, that would have never happened 10 years ago. And it happens because people like you, Marci, say, this is not cool.
Yeah.
Look at me, I can do this. So you're making that sacrifice for so many of us who believe that we don't belong in those spaces. And you talking up and you having running groups and you sharing your story is instrumental in allowing people the opportunity to see themselves represented. So thank you for being that person. Thank you for being fearless in that way.
Thank you. But I really can't take that thanks without letting you know that Myrna is the whole reason that I exist in this space. And she, because I joined her group a long time ago. She was the first person in a larger body that I had seen anywhere in media running. And I was already running at the time, but when I first saw her, I was like, oh, so maybe I'm not like wrong in that I need to, that I can be a runner in this body. Maybe this is something that I can actually do. And then when I joined her group, Fat Girl Running, I started posting videos of just my little workouts that I would do in my hallway. And after a few of those and posting my runs and stuff, we had an interaction because some jerk DM'd me something inappropriate. And I told her, about him and asked her maybe to block him. And she said, yep, done. And then she said, I really like your vibe. Have you thought about becoming a running coach? And I mean, when your hero tells you should do something, you then go and do it.
That's the universe booping you on the head. That's the universe going, boop, I need you to be here.
Yeah. So that's when I went and got my USATF certification, and then immediately after that, I got my RCA certification, and now I've been running coaching for almost 2 years now.
Wow. So tell me, what does that look like? So how do you coach people in running?
Okay, so what I do, I generally do group coaching, and it's usually virtual, which means all of the workouts and things that I assign people can do on their own time, when it's comfortable and convenient for them. And we meet just once a week on Zoom. I'm available for other questions and things like that throughout the week to all of my athletes, but we meet once a week on Zoom. And generally what I do is I give a small running specific instruction, right? I'm also a teacher in my real world. And so I teach 8th grade math. So this is just an extension of teaching there.
Yes.
And so I do explicit instruction on how to run, form, gear, breathing, all of the things that come with how you should be running, right? Mm-hmm. And then once I do that little instruction piece, then we talk about all of the other things that come with being runners. And it starts with this. It starts with your mindset. And we talk about how all of those voices that are not just in our own minds, but also coming from outside, about how those have us convinced that what we're doing isn't going to work, right? And so we work a lot with, I just provide a space to let people talk about their experiences and to kind of push back on some of the messaging that we're telling ourselves or that the world is telling us. And most of my sessions end up kind of being therapy sessions. I am not a therapist, but we end up talking about a lot of things and commiserating on a lot of things and just finding a space where we can be this person that we are in this body that we're in that has dealt with so much BS over the years in terms of not being acceptable to society. And we just find a place where we can talk about it and belong. And that's where it goes. And then I, at the end of each meeting, I give them their assignment for the week, a certain number of runs and a certain interval. And what I usually do is I always teach run walk intervals. And we start out with various different run intervals and then walk intervals. And usually people will pick their own, and they do an exploration run each week where they find out where they sit right now. And that's what we do. That's it.
I love it. I love the community aspect of it because it makes it so much easier to run with someone else. And I find it makes it, it helps you be consistent. Because when people ask me, where do you find the motivation to run or ride your bike or go to the gym? It's not really motivation for me. It's consistency. And It's also about feeling better. Like I just know that when running for a long time was my yoga. Because I would work through the scenarios in my life in my head, or I would pretend that I was like riding something as I was running, and I'm just generally looking around. So my favorite time to run would be in the springtime when the magnolia trees were blooming and the crabapple trees were blooming. And I live along the Detroit River. So one of my favorite runs was to run along the Detroit River and look over at Detroit from Canada and see how many people I could see walking on the street in Detroit in my run, because that's how close it is. That's how close I can see it. And just, looking at it in terms of movement, in terms of clearing my head, in terms of making peace with my body, and not always as a connection to changing the aesthetic of my body. Which is different than saying, listen, like I run and do cardiovascular exercise because heart disease runs in my family. Mm-hmm. And I'm 52. And when my parents were this age, they were on heart medication. Mm-hmm. I have so far, it might still happen to me. Genetics play a big role. I so far have managed to avoid that part, right? By having this, cardiovascular thing that I love that is also an investment in my future self. So when people come to you and they're looking to lose weight with running, how do you address something like that?
Well, the first thing I say is, well, I'm not going to teach you how to run to lose weight. Yeah. And I'll just say that flat out. A lot of people come to me and they say, hey, I'm in a larger body. I weigh 250, 300 pounds or whatever. And I'm worried. I don't know how to get started, and I'm worried that I'm going to hurt myself.
Sure.
That I can deal with. When someone tells me I want to run to lose weight, I'm overweight, and I want to use this, I'm like, okay, first of all, I don't teach you to run to lose weight. I teach you to run to learn to love running. Running in itself is its own reward. And I can do that for you. But I cannot guarantee that you're going to lose weight, because there is no program that's going to guarantee that you're going to lose weight. You may lose weight by increasing your activity and possibly, doing some other health promoting behaviors, right? But that's not there's no guarantee there. So when someone comes to me and mentions that, generally, if they've been following me for a while, they understand that's not my thing. But what I am going to teach them is that you're going to have a better relationship with your body. You're going to have a better relationship with movement. You're going to have a better relationship with running. And in doing a behavior like running, it is a health promoting behavior, and you might have health benefits from that. There's no guarantee there either. But the idea is that you're doing something that's good for you. It's good for your body. It feels good. And it can be a community that makes you feel good about yourself too.
Amazing. I think that's great, because I really feel like for so long that any kind of movement that we have done has been intrinsically linked to weight loss and changing the aesthetic of your body. And for a lot of us, there's trauma kind of wrapped up in that. I remember when I was in grade school, we'd have to do the fitness test, which was, I think in America, they call it the president's fitness test, something. Here in Canada, it's just a fitness test. And in grade school, you had to do like 4 minutes of running. You had to do so many pull-ups. You had to hang from a rope. You had to do so many push-ups. You had to do so many sit-ups. And we would use that as a marker of people's physical fitness, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, because like you, I didn't really participate in a lot of team sports. I think my parents signed me up for like softball, and I did that for a couple of years because my parents wanted me to, not because I had any big love affair with it. I was really actually afraid of the ball. But I really did I went to dance class. I rode the crap out of my bike, which I still do. I have a bike in my office. I call her Spinderella, and her and I hang out. We hang out together. We rock out to ABBA. We carry on. I talk to her like she's my girlfriend. And, for 2 years, I've been on Spinderella almost every single day because it just feels good and it's fun, right? I just have fun. And it just so happens that it helps to make my heart more healthy. Right. But I would really love us to get to a point in the world where we can divorce the idea of movement as a way to change a body aesthetic. And you'll notice I'm saying aesthetic, meaning looking a certain way as opposed to feeling a certain way. You can certainly, attach movement to feeling good, which I think is amazing, but not that this is something that we do to punish our bodies for not looking a certain way.
Yeah. And I really hope that we can divorce our sense of self from the way our body looks as well. Like it's just, we've been in this body positive space for a while now.
I like to put that in quotes, just for those of you who are listening to the podcast. Body positive was in quotes, and I agree. I think we're on the same page with that. Yeah.
So, and for anybody who doesn't understand why I put that in quotes, the body positivity movement was kind of co-opted from Black women who started the movement, right? And it was fat Black women who started this movement, and it was more about liberation. It was more about understanding how all of us are valued in the way that we are. And body positivity was co-opted by corporations who are trying to make a buck and sell you, makeup to cover up your freckles, right? Yes. So I really hope that one day the fat liberation movement has more of a voice in terms of the fact that we are not defined by the size of our bodies, right? Absolutely. There are so many more things that define us, so many more things that I teach my students, right? Mm-hmm. When I have 14-year-olds in my classroom, I teach them things like, let's be kind to each other. Let's care for each other. Let's care for our community. These are things that matter. It's not so much whether or not you have the prettiest eyes or the thinnest stomach or any of that. Yeah. It's really about how we treat each other and how we view community. This is a discussion that we're having at my school on my leadership team. about building our community within our school, because since the pandemic, that's been something that's been missing.
Yes,
So,
that's a challenge.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just community has been my space for a while now, and building my own community through the pandemic with my running has also, helped me realize how much it's missing within my school. And it's not necessarily, that this particular school has a major problem with it. It's just that the pandemic caused a lot of separation for people in general. And teaching, I mean, our job as teachers is to teach not just the curriculum, but also social emotional learning and things about how kids need to be human. And I really think that that's something that we need to go back to. Even though I teach algebra, I still want my algebra kids to understand that they should care about each other, right?
Absolutely. It's about preserving our humanity. And when we stop caring about each other, we're in deep trouble, right? Because that'll be the end when we stop caring about each other. And part of our caring about each other starts with caring for ourselves. So a question I ask everybody on the podcast is, what do you, Marci, do for intentional well-being for yourself? Aside from your running coach and aside from your running, are there other practices that you incorporate into your everyday life that help you feel well and that increase your well-being?
Yes, and this is one that people don't talk enough about, but I prioritize sleep.
Oh, good job. I'm jealous of you.
I do have to specify that I am in a privileged space and that my children are old enough that they don't wake me up at all hours of the day anymore.
Right.
So my kids, in fact, my son is in his senior year of high school and my daughter's in her freshman year. So I have older kids that aren't waking me up at all hours. Right. So I am able to prioritize sleep. Unfortunately, I have to get up at 5 a.m. for my job every morning, but I am able to get a good seven and a half, if I'm lucky, hours of sleep per night because of the way I've structured my schedule. Right. So making sure that I get that and allowing myself to not feel bad if I decide I'm going to sleep in on a weekend. Yeah. I try to divorce my productivity from my need for good sleep. And that, especially since it was back in May of this year that I was diagnosed with sleep apnea, and I was gifted a CPAP machine, right? This thing that was prescribed to me. It prescribed me by my doctor, but I received this thing and it was a world of difference in terms of the way that I sleep, in terms of the way that my body feels now, just being able to prioritize that sleep and get good sleep because of this machine, right? Mm-hmm. So all of that has made it so that I am able to take care of myself better. My injury healing went faster because I was sleeping better. And there's also, in addition to sleep, the other thing that I prioritize for my intentional well-being is intuitive eating. And I have been on that journey for a while.
Right? This is a new thing for a lot of people. Yes. This is a new frontier for a lot of us.
Yes. And it's been a weird and rocking journey on this intuitive eating journey, because weird things happen to me that I'm like, oh my God, was that diet culture? Or I didn't realize I had that kind of I didn't realize I had that kind of mindset or that kind of messaging around this food. There are things in my house right now that I have never been able to keep in my house longer than, a day or two, that have been here for a week, right? Like the journey that I've been on from, I didn't have an eating disorder per se, but I was definitely a disordered eater, right?
I was going to say, a lot of people have disordered eating.
Exactly.
It's normalized.
Right. And I mean, it comes from the fact that I've always been in a larger body. I was a fat kid, and my parents did everything from, putting me on diets when I was 10 years old to locking up in a literal trunk in the kitchen the food that they didn't want me to eat. Right. So, so there's a lot of trauma and things that you need to say. That breaks me. And all of that plays into part of the reason that my body is the way it is. Constant dieting and weight cycling, all of that affects your body too. So, the intentional, to get it back to your original question, intuitive eating it's a journey that I'm on, and that is part of what I'm trying to do to build the relationship with my body and my food and my fuel for my running, and also the sleep, prioritizing sleep, and running, of course, is always going to be a special place for me too.
I love that. So brilliant. You know what? Shout out for you for recognizing that prioritizing sleep is important. For most of my life, I've been saying things like, I will sleep when I'm dead. Yeah. And I've come to realize now that I've been prioritizing my sleep for like 3 weeks now, I'm with you too. I have older children. I also have a son who's in his senior year of high school, and I have a son who's a sophomore. And so I am not being woken up by babies in the middle of the night. So that's great. And I don't have to get them ready for school. Yeah. So if I choose to sleep in on a, Wednesday morning, which I actually am going to do, because I tend to get up at 5 a.m. to work out, because I like going to the gym when it's not busy, and I like getting it done first thing in the morning because it sets me up for the rest of the day. And, it increases my happiness hormones. It makes me feel, alive until about 2 when I need to lie down because I'm a little tired. But I can also just like at 2 o'clock do a little bit of yoga and reclaim my energy, or, whatever it is. But prioritizing sleep has been a game changer in terms of restoring my memory, which was really lagging. And I was like, ooh, do I need to get that checked out? And the minute I started going to bed at a reasonable hour, like actually turning off my phone and just going to bed, putting my phone in another room and not scrolling into the wee hours, because TikTok can be a rabbit hole I can go down in a second. I can spend an entire day on TikTok just being educated by the creators on there. Like, there were so many things I had no idea about until there were these incredible creators. I'm like, I had no idea. And when I learned something new, I instantly put it on my page. I'm like, I was this many years old when I learned this, right? And I thought I would share it with you, because if I don't know it, maybe somebody else doesn't know it. But prioritizing sleep has been a game changer, and also recovery. And like sometimes taking a full week off of everything and coming back on a Monday and being like, wow, I'm so much stronger because I've taken this is a conversation I had with my trainer at the gym. I'm going away for work this week. I'm not going to be doing my regular routine. I'm going to, go for a walk and do some yoga in my hotel room. But beyond that, I don't like the gym in the hotel. I'm not going to be doing any of that stuff. I'm just going to be, kind of taking it easy and focusing on the task at hand. And when I come back a week later, I feel stronger, because there's this stupid mindset I've had from 1980, whatever, that told me if I miss a day, it's the end of the world. Yep. Or if I'm not on top of it, the whole thing is ruined. And none of those things are true. Right. And it's just we know so much more about moving our bodies, about intentional movement, about, I'm going to put exercise in brackets, because I think some of us directly think, okay, exercise is something I actually have to detest and hate, because that's how it was, presented to us. Those fit tests, like I was saying, when I lost my train of thought there in school, was measuring these just arbitrary markers of fitness that was actually based on men in the military in the early, right, whatever. And, it didn't take into consideration that you went to dance class 3 nights a week. It never took into consideration that you lived 3 miles from school and you walked that every day to and from school. It took you 45 minutes to get to school because you were that far away. You rode your bike with your friends. You were out all weekend none of that counted towards physicality or fitness. Only being able to do, 10 pull-ups, which I couldn't even do 1, okay? Or I could do a bunch of sit-ups because my parents used to, like you, I was on a diet when I was 8 years old. Doing sit-ups was what my dad made me do because that was going to make me lose weight. So I was really skilled at doing sit-ups. And to be honest, you're good at what you practice. So if your dad makes you do 100 sit-ups every night, of course I'm going to kill it in this sit-up part of this fitness training, even though I can't do a friggin' pull-up or hang from the rope. Or I was able to run for 4 minutes because I played baseball. So I was able to, that was the only reason I could run for 4 minutes. Like, these arbitrary measurements of fitness is ridiculous, and dismissing all the other activity that you did. And in my mind, at that age, it never made sense to me that we don't count play.
Right. Well, and the fitness test doesn't, from a teaching perspective, as a teacher of children, it makes no sense, because the biggest portion of that test was completely ignored by everybody who gave it. And that was the fact that when you give a test, you're supposed to practice the things that you're testing on.
It just like for me right now when you said that, I'm like, duh. When you said it just occurred to me. None of us were practicing pull-ups.
Nope.
None of us were practicing running. Holy smokes. How brilliant are you?
I'm not going to claim credit for that one because that came from maintenance days.
Cool. I love that podcast, by the way. I will link all these things in the show notes below. So yeah. But that makes sense. Like, I just remember I was able to hang from a rope because we had a tree in the backyard and I used to climb it. That was the only way I could, and I would be scared to fall out of this tree because my mother would threaten to beat me if I fell out and hurt myself. You know, those silly things that parents say. You fall out of that tree and break your leg, you're getting whatever. So I had the grip to be able to hold on to the rope. I just would like wrap my leg around the rope and literally hang upside down because that's what I did at home. And everybody thought it was funny because I had this kind of hair and it would all just be like hanging upside down. People thought it was hilarious. But that's how I would beat that timer because you had to hold that rope, I think, for a minute, which felt like hours. And I could be up there for 3 minutes because I would just wrap my leg around the rope, wrap it around my waist, and then hang upside down.
There you go. Got
it. I'm not even holding myself up. Right? I'm not even holding myself up. I just know the hack to beat the timer. I just know
the system, Dianne.
Right? Just know the hack. From hanging out in the tree in the yard. That's all, right? And all of these things and all that measurement for what? To create anxiety in young children?
Yeah.
To make them feel bad about their bodies? What are we actually measuring?
I still can't believe, and I hear about it every once in a while, there are schools out there that are still doing weigh-ins and they're still doing like body measurements and things like that. And they don't do it in a room away from other kids. It's entirely shaming of these kids that they don't, and how many kids do you know actually have control over their body size, right? How many humans actually have control over our body sizes, right?
Yeah. I know. This is a whole other podcast in and of itself, right? As we roll up on the hour, is there anything you would like our listeners to know about running, intentional well-being, anything you offer? And of course, we're going to link everything down below so that you can reach out to Miss Marci and start your running journey, because it is a lovely journey. I love running.
Oh, it is a lovely journey. And that's really what I want people to know. I want people to know that running isn't as bad as people think it is. Like, I have so many people who tell me they hate running. And I'm just like, you haven't taken my course.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
It can be so much fun.
Because it truly is. You can truly learn, even if you hate running right now, if you just do a little mindset switch and really start to notice how your body feels when it moves, when it moves the way that it wants to move and the way that you let it move. When your body does what it wants to do, you feel amazing. And we get so caught up in everybody else telling us how things should be that we forget to listen to our bodies. And that's what I want people to do, is just listen to their bodies and learn how movement feels. But I do tell people all the time, running is my thing. I absolutely love it. And it's something that I would do for literally hours. And I do for literally hours at a time, right? But one thing that I want people to know is that it doesn't have to be your thing. Even people who take my courses, I tell them on the first day, running is my thing. It doesn't have to be yours. If you find that you are not enjoying this, it's not your joyful movement. Find something else that is your joyful movement.
I love that. 100%. And on that perfect tidbit, that perfect soundbite, I want to thank Marci, the Fat Athlete, for coming on our little podcast and sharing the joy of running. I can't tell you how excited I was when I saw your Instagram page. A little part of my heart went, ooh, you know what I mean? And I want to talk to her. Like, I want everybody to know that this world is for all of us. It really is. And that you can do it if you want it. And like you said, I think is a really good point to make. If running isn't your joyful, mindful, intentional movement, however you want to call it, find something that is, and just like enjoy the shit out of it for no other reason, for the sheer joy of it. And every other thing that happens because of that joy is simply a bonus, right? Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for listening in on the Intentional Wellbeing Podcast. Please, if you are listening to us on Apple or anywhere you're listening to podcasts, give us a rating, give us a thumbs up, and share this podcast with anybody you know who might be interested in starting running. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Dianne.
Thank you. Awesome. You're an excellent podcast guest. I'm just going to stop.